Greens leader Bob Brown has long called for Australian troops to come out of Afghanistan, and that's what he'll be reiterating when the parliamentary debate reaches the Senate next week. And Senator Brown is in our Parliament House studio. Senator, good morning.
Good morning, Fran.
The mother of one of the Australian soldiers killed in Afghanistan, Benjamin Ronaldo, has written an open letter to all politicians at the start of this debate. Jennifer Ward writes that many people have forgotten that Afghanistan is a breeding ground for terrorism that has cost many lives in 9/11 and in Bali. Pulling out now would give the Taliban free rein over the world. Do you have sympathy with that view?
I have sympathy with the mother expressing her heartfelt point of view. I've had communications from relatives of other soldiers in Afghanistan who want their sons, their brothers, their loved ones brought out immediately. And that's why this debate's so important, and that's why I've been pushing for it, Fran. These are real people whose lives are at stake, whose loved ones' lives are at stake, and we have to maturely assess, as a parliament of a democratic nation, what those risks are. We've seen 6 more young Australians killed in the last 6 months. There's a rising, and the total's now 21. There's many hundreds some hundreds have been brought home with either physical or mental impairment. The trajectory is for that to get worse, not better. And we have to seriously have at least a rain check on this after 9.5 years in which there's been no parliamentary debate at all, except the occasional ministerial statement.
Well, I'm wondering what you mean when you say rain check. Debate is all very well, but what is the position for the Greens? Are you calling for the Australian troops to be come home?
The position for the Greens is to have our troops safely withdrawn.
Do you have a timeline on that?
As soon as they could safely be withdrawn from what is effectively an engagement in what is the war in Afghanistan. We invaded Afghanistan, took over the country, expelled the government to get rid of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda's got rid of. It's now in Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, and in the North Africa. But we're not invading those places. Afghan's free of Al-Qaeda. But it has an insurgency with the Taliban, and it's interesting to hear the minister and government heads here and elsewhere now talking about engagement with the Taliban. 12 or 24 months ago, that wouldn't have been heard, and things are changing rapidly in Afghanistan. I'm concerned about the life, limb and safety of our Australian troops, who I think one thing in this debate, Fran, will be a very strong endorsement of our troops, a backing of our troops. They're there at the government's behest for this nation, but there won't be anybody in the parliament who doesn't support them and admire them and thank them for the courage and the commitment they make for this country.
I'm sure that's true, and that's probably a general sentiment in the society more broadly. But Australians listening to this debate, I think it's, as you listen, as we have been debating it on breakfast yesterday and with the Minister now, very difficult to understand still what our mission is and what will be success, why we are there and why we will leave. What do you understand the mission in Afghanistan to be?
Well, I'm like you. It's confusing. And when you hear General Petraeus, who's now the head of the Allied forces, if you like, in Afghanistan, referring to the government there as a criminal syndicate, and you hear about the corruption of the Karzai government, you hear about the fact that there's 10 times as much US money being spent in the war effort in Afghanistan as there is in civil aid, and this is one of the most poverty-stricken countries in the world, you have to wonder if we've got the settings right here. If we couldn't be doing a much better job through civil aid to the Afghani people to determine their own future.
But it's a circular argument, isn't it? Because there's plenty who say you can't put the civilian aid workers in until you get the security situation safe for them.
Well, we're not necessarily talking about putting the civilian aid workers in. We are talking about raising education, raising a country out of dire poverty.
Yes, but if a country is caught in conflict and violence and bloodshed, and if there's an insurgency there that is threatening people, then you can't build the schools. And as soon as you do build the schools, if the Taliban are resurgent, the girls will not be able to go to school. Back to that point.
Well, what's been found now is that there's a big diversity in the Taliban. There are talks taking place with the Taliban. And the Karzai government has been talking with the Taliban. Now, it's news to Australians that we aren't in a war that's winnable, but there's general agreement emerging because of this debate, the flagging of this debate in Parliament, that in conventional terms the war isn't winnable. We therefore have to say what are those targets, and you were just engaging with the Minister on that, and how do we get our troops out of that country while having achieved a recognised set of targets, if you like, of the government. We believe our troops should be withdrawn safely as soon as possible, as the Netherlands troops have been withdrawn. Canada's coming out next year. Britain will be shortly after that, and yet we have no fixed timetable or exit strategy for the Australian troops.
There's a couple of other issues I want to get to, but just briefly, you've been criticised for the fact that you haven't been to Afghanistan to see the troops firsthand. Now, you are talking about going. Is that definite? You will visit the troops?
Well, I'm talking about going. My big problem here is hundreds of Australian politicians flying in and out of Afghanistan creates a big security problem of itself. I don't think we should be diverting our troops away from the job they're committed to in Afghanistan to be looking after fly-in and out political celebrities. We can get those briefings and have had those briefings. We have ministerial statements. Is there something that we should know that's not in those ministerial statements to Parliament? Sure, Prime Ministers, the Leader of the Opposition, neither of them went to Afghanistan before this recent election. John Howard took 6 years after he sent our troops to Afghanistan and then withdrew and made that huge mistake that Stephen Smith was talking about of invading Iraq and taking the eye off the ball in Afghanistan. But it wasn't until 2007 that John Howard actually went to Afghanistan. So I'm a little bit wary about saying you've got to go to Afghanistan to be able to take part in a political debate. I don't think that is so.
OK. Can I ask you about children in detention? The Prime Minister was at pains to point out yesterday that the government's decision to release children and families from mandatory detention was not made in consultation with the Greens. Let's have a listen.
These measures have not been part of a deal with other parties, as has been suggested. These decisions have been taken by the government and the government alone. There have been no discussions about these specific measures with other political parties or parliamentarians.
Bob Brown, no discussions with the Greens or other political parties about these specific measures?
Yes, the Prime Minister reads the paper and watches the television, and she'll have seen Sarah Hanson-Young pushing very strongly over a long period now to get children out of detention. I led that debate in this Parliament when the Howard government had this obscene situation of children behind barbed wire in the Australian desert. And with people right across the political spectrum, that was ended. It's now something that is being ended, but there has been a very strong lead in the public debate by the Australian Greens, and I have absolutely no doubt that's helped bring about this change of policy.
And Bob Brown, just finally, we're almost out of time, but we expect a major peace deal will be announced in your home state of Tasmania today, which will see loggers shifted out of old-growth forests and into plantations. How significant is this?
Well, I think out of large tracts of very contentious old-growth forests, it's a big breakthrough. You know, it's the biggest, if as touted, it actually occurs, it'll be a win-win situation for the Tasmanian people. Our future depends on the natural beauty, the scenic beauty, these magnificent forests, the tallest forests in the Southern Hemisphere, enormous carbon banks. They're full of rare and endangered species. They're a huge attractant to industry, the hospitality industry, which is growing thousands of jobs at a time when the logging industry's been shedding jobs. So it's got great economic employment potential as well as a huge environmental breakthrough, which, by the way, should go across to the forests of mainland South East Australia, South East New South Wales and Victoria as well.
Never happy, are you, Senator Brown? Thank you very much for joining us. There's more to do, that's what I mean. Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Bob Brown, Greens leader, and it's 4 minutes to 8 on RM Breakfast.